There comes a moment, not dramatic, not announced, when the inner noise grows louder than the world outside. A moment when distraction stops working, when achievement tastes flat, when the mask you've worn so well begins to suffocate you from the inside. This is not failure. This is the summons. You have been running from a part of yourself your entire life, and now it has decided to stop chasing and start waiting. Waiting in your exhaustion, waiting in your irritability, waiting in the quiet question that keeps returning no matter how busy you stay. Why does this still feel incomplete? The shadow does not arrive as darkness. It arrives as tension, as contradiction, as the gap between who you present as and who you actually are when no one is watching. And the more you try to outrun it, the more it shapes you from behind. You were taught early to divide yourself, to keep the acceptable and discard the inconvenient, to polish the parts that earned approval and bury the ones that threatened belonging. This was not cruelty, it was adaptation. But adaptation has a cost. Everything you exile from consciousness does not disappear. It becomes autonomous. It moves underground. It begins influencing your choices, your reactions, your relationships, your fate, without asking permission. This is the shadow. Not evil, not monstrous, just unintegrated life. It is the anger you learn to suppress, the ambition you learn to downplay, the envy you refuse to admit, the hunger to be seen that you disguised as humility, the desire for power you rebranded as not caring. You thought burying these things made you good. It made you fragmented, and fragmentation always leaks. It leaks as resentment disguised as morality, as sarcasm disguised as humor, as self-sabotage disguised as bad luck, as exhaustion disguised as busyness. You wonder why certain people irritate you instantly, why confidence in others provokes hostility, why authority makes you recoil or submit without thinking, why intimacy feels both desired and threatening. These are not random reactions. They are shadow material trying to surface. The shadow announces itself through triggers, because triggers bypass the ego's control. They expose where you are still unconsciously ruled, where your self-image collapses under pressure, where you are not as free as you believe. And this is where most people turn away. They double down on control, on righteousness, on explanation. They blame the world for provoking them instead of asking why the provocation worked. But if you are listening to this, something in you already knows. The enemy is not outside. It never was. Meeting the shadow within is not about becoming darker. It is about becoming honest. Honest enough to admit that you are capable of far more than the persona you display. You are capable of cruelty even if you never act on it. You are capable of manipulation even if you despise it. You are capable of destruction even if you preach peace. This admission terrifies the ego because it destroys the illusion of innocence. But innocence was never strength. Responsibility is. A person who has never faced their capacity for harm is not moral, they are untested. A person who denies their hunger for power is ruled by it unconsciously. A person who refuses to acknowledge their shadow becomes its instrument. This is why the most good people often implode, why repression leads to explosion, why denial creates monsters. The shadow does not want control. It wants recognition, recognition without indulgence, awareness without panic, containment without shame. When you finally turn toward it, you expect chaos. You expect to lose control. You expect to become someone you won't recognize. What actually happens is quieter. You begin to see patterns. You recognize motives beneath behavior. You understand why certain temptations exist. You see the logic behind impulses you once condemned. Understanding replaces fear, and fear was the leash. As you meet the shadow, you stop performing goodness and start choosing it. You stop suppressing anger and start refining it into boundaries. You stop denying ambition and start structuring it into purpose. You stop moralizing desire and start directing it with discipline. Nothing is wasted. What was once destructive becomes protective. What was once chaotic becomes powerful. What was once unconscious becomes choice. This is integration. Integration is not softness. It is strength with awareness. It allows you to be dangerous without being destructive, to hold intensity without acting blindly, to remain calm not because you are numb, but because you are complete. You no longer need to posture. You no longer need to dominate or submit. You no longer need to prove anything. Your presence changes, not louder, heavier. People feel it. They may not understand it, but they sense that you are no longer easily manipulated. That guilt no longer hooks you. That provocation no longer guarantees reaction. This unsettles those who benefited from your unconsciousness. But that is not your concern. You are no longer living to be managed. Meeting the shadow within restores your spine. It gives you access to assertiveness without cruelty, compassion without collapse, confidence without arrogance. You stop mistaking niceness for virtue. You realize that being agreeable cost you honesty, and being honest is what finally gives you peace. You are no longer afraid of silence because nothing inside you is screaming to be seen. You are no longer haunted by impulses because they have a place. You are no longer fragmented because nothing essential is disowned. The shadow becomes an ally, not a voice that commands, but a reservoir of strength you can draw from when needed. You understand now why life kept forcing you into uncomfortable situations, why the same conflicts repeated, why the same traits in others triggered you again and again. Life was not punishing you. It was leading you to yourself, to the part of you strong enough to carry truth without flinching, to the part of you capable of holding power responsibly, to the part of you that does not need approval to exist fully. This is not the end of struggle, but it is the end of unconscious struggle. From here, you move differently. You choose consciously. You confront when necessary. You walk away without resentment. You stand without apology. You are no longer split between light and dark. You are whole. And wholeness does not announce itself. It acts, it decides, it endures. Meeting the shadow within was never about defeating it. It was about claiming what was always yours. And now that you have, nothing inside you needs to hide. Nothing outside you needs to be feared. And nothing in this world can control you through what you refuse to see. This is not transformation. This is reclamation. And from here, you live not as a fragment trying to survive, but as a complete human being, capable of carrying both light and darkness without being owned by either. That is the quiet power of meeting the shadow within. And once met, it never leaves. It stands with you, integrated, disciplined, yours. And standing with it, you begin to understand something most never do. The shadow was never trying to ruin your life. It was trying to enter it. Everything you called sabotage was misdirected energy. Everything you labeled weakness was strength without a channel. Everything you feared becoming was power without responsibility. Once this truth lands, the inner tension you carried for years starts to reorganize, not disappear, but align. You feel it in moments where you would have once reacted. The pause arrives naturally now, not forced, not performative, just there. A space wide enough to choose who you will be. This is where mastery begins. Not mastery over others, but mastery over the impulse to escape yourself. You start noticing how rarely people actually choose, how often they are pushed by mood, provoked by insecurity, steered by fear they never named. You see how easily power shifts to those who can remain still while others spiral. And you realize stillness is not passivity. It is containment, containment of emotion, containment of desire, containment of force. The shadow gives you force. Integration gives you control. Without integration, force becomes destruction. With integration, it becomes direction. This is why your presence now carries weight. You no longer leak energy through over-explanation or defensiveness. You don't rush to justify yourself. You don't need to prove your intentions. You let actions speak because you trust them to. Trust, real trust, only comes after self-knowledge. Before, you doubted yourself because parts of you were hidden even from you. You didn't know what you might do under pressure, so you avoided pressure. You didn't know your limits, so you let others define them. Now, you know. You know where your anger lives and how to aim it. You know where your ambition hides and how to structure it. You know where your hunger for meaning burns and how to feed it without burning down your life. This knowing is stabilizing. It allows you to enter conflict without losing yourself, to face authority without shrinking, to take responsibility without resentment, to say no without guilt and yes without self-betrayal. Your relationships change again, not because you demand different treatment, but because you no longer accept unconscious dynamics. You don't play roles you've outgrown. You don't reenact old scripts. You meet people where they are and decide consciously whether to stay. This is not coldness. This is clarity. Clarity allows compassion without entanglement. You can see others' shadows without needing to fight them or fix them. You understand that everyone is wrestling with something unclaimed, but you no longer volunteer to be the battlefield. The shadow within you also deepens your humility, not the humility of shrinking, but the humility of realism. You no longer believe you are above corruption, above temptation, above cruelty. You know what you are capable of. And because you know, you choose carefully. This is why integrated people are trustworthy. Not because they lack darkness, but because they have faced it and taken responsibility for it. They don't need rigid rules to stay aligned. They don't need constant supervision. Their restraint is internal. You feel this restraint now, not as suppression, but as self-respect. You respect your energy too much to waste it. You respect your mind too much to poison it with denial. You respect your life too much to live it half-expressed. The shadow, once integrated, stops whispering through sabotage and starts speaking through intuition. It alerts you when something is off. It sharpens your perception. It gives you courage when comfort would betray you. You stop fearing your depth. You stop apologizing for your intensity. You stop wishing you were simpler, quieter, easier. You were never meant to be easy. You were meant to be whole. And wholeness is demanding. It asks you to stand alone at times, to be misunderstood without correcting the story, to walk away without burning bridges or begging for closure. It asks you to carry the weight of who you are without collapsing into performance. But in return, it gives you something rare, inner authority. Authority that does not come from dominance, but from coherence, from the fact that nothing inside you is disowned, from the fact that you are not at war with yourself. This is why fear loses its grip. Fear thrives on division, on uncertainty about who you are, on the suspicion that something inside you might betray you. Where nothing is hidden, fear has nowhere to attach. You are no longer afraid of what might come out under pressure because you know what lives there. Strength, discernment, resolve. Meeting the shadow within did not make you darker. It made you real. And reality, when faced fully, does not weaken you. It grounds you. From here, you do not seek transformation anymore. You live from integration. You are not chasing light or fleeing darkness. You are standing in the middle of yourself, awake, accountable, and unafraid. And that stance changes everything. Not because the world suddenly becomes kind, but because nothing in it can own you through what you refuse to see. You have met the shadow. And because you did, it no longer controls the path. It walks beside you, quiet, contained, and finally home. And with it beside you, something settles into your bones that cannot be shaken by opinion, chaos, or pressure. You stop asking whether you are enough. That question only exists when parts of you are missing. Now, you measure yourself differently. not by approval, not by outcomes, not by how well you are received, but by alignment, by whether your actions agree with your inner knowing, by whether you leave situations intact instead of fragmented. This changes how you experience struggle. Struggle no longer feels like proof of failure. It feels like resistance, meeting strength, like weight training for the psyche. You understand that friction is not a sign you are off path. It is often the confirmation that you are carrying something real. Before, pain scattered you. Now, it concentrates you. You can sit inside discomfort without narrating yourself into despair. You can endure uncertainty without grasping for false certainty. You can be wrong without collapsing into shame, because shame fed on the parts of you that were hidden, and there are no hidden parts anymore. You notice how much of your former anxiety was simply unclaimed power, energy with nowhere to go, emotion without structure, instinct without leadership. Now, that leadership exists, not loud, not rigid, present. You lead yourself the way a seasoned hand guides a blade, firm enough to be precise, gentle enough not to break it. You don't suppress your edge, you refine it. This refinement shows up in how you act. You are slower to speak, but when you do, your words land. You are less reactive, but more decisive. You move with fewer options, but greater commitment. Indecision fades when the inner conflict ends. You are no longer negotiating between competing selves, one that wants to be liked, one that wants to be free, one that wants to disappear. They have been gathered, integrated, placed under one direction. That direction is not ambition. It is responsibility. Responsibility for the effect you have on the world. Responsibility for the energy you bring into rooms. Responsibility for the standards you embody rather than preach. You stop demanding change from others. You understand now that people reveal themselves under pressure, and you reveal yourself by how you respond. This awareness deepens your patience, but it also sharpens your boundaries. You give fewer chances, but you give them honestly. You don't linger in ambiguity, hoping it will resolve itself. You act when clarity arrives. Clarity is no longer something you chase. It emerges when you stop lying to yourself. The shadow taught you that. It taught you that avoidance masquerades as peace, that denial dresses itself as virtue, that repression pretends to be control, and it taught you the cost of all three. Now, you can feel when something is misaligned immediately, not emotionally, somatically, a tightening, a dullness, a quiet resistance in the body. You listen, you adjust, you don't argue with your own signals anymore. This listening makes you adaptable, not pliable but responsive. You are no longer rigidly attached to identities that once defined you. You understand that becoming is continuous and rigidity is just fear pretending to be principle. Principles are alive. They evolve as consciousness deepens, and yours has deepened. You can hold paradox now, strength and softness, compassion and firmness, solitude and connection. You no longer feel the need to choose one side to feel safe. Safety comes from coherence, from knowing that whatever situation you enter it as yourself undivided. This is why you are no longer exhausted in the same way. You may still work hard, you may still face resistance, but the fatigue of self-suppression is gone. That was the heaviest burden. Suppressing truth takes more energy than any challenge ever will. Now, your energy circulates instead of stagnates. It moves into creation, into focus, into presence. You find yourself drawn to work that demands depth, to conversations that require honesty, to silence that reveals instead of numbs. You are no longer interested in proving your worth. You are interested in living it. And this is where something almost sacred appears. Gratitude without dependency. Gratitude not because life is easy, but because it is real, because you are awake inside it, because you are no longer wasting it pretending to be someone safer than you are. You feel grateful for the discomfort that forced you inward, for the breakdowns that exposed the lie, for the conflicts that revealed where you were still divided. Nothing was wasted. The shadow did not arrive late, it arrived on time, exactly when you were strong enough to face it without being consumed. And now, as you move forward, you carry it not as a burden, but as ballast, weight that stabilizes you in rough conditions, depth that keeps you upright when others are blown sideways by reaction and fear. You are not invincible. You are integrated. And integration is stronger than invincibility ever could be because it does not depend on denial. It depends on truth. Truth lived, not declared. Truth embodied, not explained. Truth held steady when it would be easier to perform, escape, or collapse. Meeting the shadow within did not give you answers. It gave you yourself. And with yourself intact, the path no longer needs to be certain, only honest, only walked, only owned. And so you continue, not chasing completion, not fleeing darkness, not bargaining with fear, but moving forward as a whole human being, capable of carrying the full weight of existence without fragmenting. That is not the end of the journey. That is the moment you finally stop leaving yourself behind. And this is where it concludes not with a victory over darkness, not with a promise of perfection, but with something far more enduring. I no longer fear what lives inside me. I no longer pretend to be harmless. I no longer divide myself to be accepted. I have met the shadow within me, and I did not disappear. I did not lose control. I did not become someone unrecognizable. I became someone integrated. What once undermined me now steadies me. What once frightened me now grounds me. What once waited in the dark now walks beside me in full awareness. I do not need to be pure to be trustworthy. I do not need to be small to be safe. I do not need to deny my depth to live with integrity. I carry my strength consciously. I hold my intensity responsibly. I choose my actions deliberately. This is not the end of struggle, but it is the end of inner war. Nothing inside me is exiled anymore. Nothing inside me needs to scream to be heard. Nothing inside me waits in the dark to take control. I stand whole, and from this wholeness, I move forward without masks, without apologies, without fear of what I might become under pressure, because I already know I am capable, I am accountable, I am awake. Meeting the shadow within was never about conquering it. It was about reclaiming myself. And now, with nothing left to hide from and nothing left to run from, I live not fragmented, not diminished, but fully, consciously, and unashamed of the depth that makes me real.